Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that endeavours to make some sense of the nonsense. Well, we try. I'm Kenny Campbell.
And I'm Naomi Smith. Every week we take the political temperature and then apply a cold compress for your listening comfort.
We may as well make things comfortable because we are all in this together.
So settle down and adopt your finest lounging position as we bring you another Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Kenny.
And I'm Naomi. Now, there is sadly no Alex with us this week. He is a little bit under the weather and currently can't even look at a screen without his eyes streaming. That's probably all of us right now, isn't it? So he's recuperating at home. So we're sending him lots of get well soon wishes, Alex. But I think he might be back before the week is out with some election results to dissect.
And if you'd like to help keep Alex and Chamomile and this show on the road, please pop over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod to sign up as a Quiet Riot supporter for as little as £5 crisp a month. That will allow us to keep our show free at the point of delivery for everyone, whatever their circumstances.
So this week, we're going to take a deep dive into the business of right-wing politics, or should that be the monkey business of right-wing political funding?
And as we brace for the results of the elections that are being caricatured as left bloc versus right bloc, we ask, what about the voters in the centre ground? Who exactly is stuck in the middle with you and me?
To help us navigate our electoral minefields of choice, who better than political megabrain, Substack Superman, and Institute for Government Senior Fellow, Sam Freedman. Sam, welcome back to the show.
Lovely to be here as always. I'm not going to try and do an impression of Alex. But...
Rory Bremner does a good one. He usually does it on when Alex says how you and I would pronounce what. Alex would do what. And Rory does a very good impression of that. Sam, it is elections a go-go in the UK this week, which means you are being kept particularly busy. But I've got two questions for you. One, have you got a favourite election, like here or abroad, political or otherwise, that you really get drawn to hawking? And then a question we put to Luke Trill last week, thinking about Thursday night, is there any particular council or parish or county or mayoral that you've got your eye on as a particularly interesting one to watch out for on the night?
So I'll answer that one first. I possibly the first person to ever say that Swindon is going to be the most interesting place on the night. Apologies to any listeners in Swindon.
It's the classic bellwether usually in a general election.
So this is exactly why I think it's interesting. So last time Swindon Council was up for election, Labour won it, and that was a pretty good indication that they were on track to win the 2024 general election. This time, it is one of those contests where it's traditionally been Tory versus Labour, Reform are coming through the middle, and it could be a Labour hold, it could be Reform sweep through the middle and take the whole council. And if Reform do win a council like Swindon, that kind of tells us quite a lot about their potential to win a general election. Because if they're only able to win in types of areas that have a specific type of population that was very heavy Leave voters and so on, then they're a bit restricted. But if they can win places like Swindon, Milton Keynes is up for election as well.
Places like that. I'm just trying to find out what time we think Swindon's going to be fully declared.
I think it's the afternoon on Friday. Yeah, I don't think it's an overnight one. So that one I'm keeping a close eye on. I think overnight, if you're mad enough to stay up all night, the ones to look out for are the ones in London in the sort of western centre. So there's a whole bunch: Wandsworth, Westminster, Merton, Hammersmith,
Kensington.
Kensington. Well, Kensington will almost certainly stay Tory, but there's a block that Labour currently hold at the moment, and they could win again. And if they do, that it will help a bit of a, maybe this isn't going to be quite so bad for them narrative. Whereas if they lose Wandsworth and Westminster back to Tories, they lose Merton back to the Lib Dems, they lose a load of seats to the Greens and Hammersmith, then you start to think, oh God, this is really going to be at the lower end of expectations. This is going to be dire. So I'm keeping an eye out for those ones as well.
And then an election that in general piques your interest. I mean, I guess.
Are we talking about any in history?
Any election in history or regular ones that come
Could
up?
have been at school if you want.
So 1990, I'm very interested in 1992. 1992 was the first election I remember anything
We're all
of.
right.
Because I was 11, but, I was weird. So I do do remember that election and the sort of disappointment of everyone in my parents' living room as it became apparent the polls were wrong and the Tories were going to win another majority. But more than the UK one, I'm interested in the American one that year. Mm-hmm. It was a very strange election.
Yeah.
Clinton beat Bush, but Ross Perot briefly led the polls as a third-party candidate. And I think in a way that's almost become the defining election in terms of election strategists since then. You had the famous "It's the economy, stupid" line was developed during that campaign by James Carville. And I think the Clinton campaign has had more influence on political strategy than pretty much anything else that's happened since. So that's what I'm thinking a lot about at the moment.
Fab.
It's funny that my first election memory is when Reagan got, I was going to say arrested. Okay, I wish. But I went into school it must have been a Monday after the result was announced. And my maths teacher, who was a very polite spoken man, Mr. Sargent, announced to the class, "We're all completely doomed now. You're going to die in a nuclear holocaust."
We're all doomed.
What? All right, I better pay attention to politics. I'm bloody terrified.
Quiet, Riot.
Reform UK is riding high in the polls, but the past few days have thrown up a series of stories that raise questions about whether the party plays by the same rules as everyone else. First came the revelation that Nigel Farage had received £5 million in a personal gift from Christopher Harborne, a Thailand-based crypto billionaire who has now donated more than £22 million to Reform in total, making him the largest single donor to any UK political party in history. Farage did not disclose the personal gift. The matter has been referred to the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner and is being investigated by the Electoral Commission. Let's have a little listen to what Farage had to say about it.
I've been the most attacked, physically, politician of modern times. And yet, despite repeated requests to the Home Office, the police, for protection and help, I've been denied at every twist and turn. This money is the only way I can look after myself and protect myself for the rest of my life.
The rules are clear, though, aren't they?
The rules are very, very clear. The rules are very, very clear. And believe you me, we've looked at this from every legal angle. There is no obligation to declare something that is an unconditional, non-political, personal gift. And it will ensure I can be safe for the rest of my life.
So Reform's defence is that it was a purely personal, unconditional gift and therefore exempt from declaration requirements. Meanwhile, Rupert Lowe's new vehicle, Restore Britain, has been forced to return donations from a so-called meme coin called Britain Token after a Labour MP complained to the Electoral Commission about the source of funds. Earlier in the week, Reform's Home Affairs spokesperson, Zia Youssef, announced that a future Reform government would place migrant detention centres in green-held constituencies and councils while exempting any area that voted Reform. Here's what he said.
In order to deport all illegal migrants in Britain, we're going to need to detain tens of thousands at a time. Migrants will not be able to leave these detention centres, and each will be held there for a couple of weeks before being deported. So here's our promise. A Reform government will not put any migrant detention centres in any constituency with a Reform MP. We will not put them where Reform controls the council. And of the remaining areas, we will prioritise green parliamentary constituencies and green-controlled councils to put those migrant detention centres. That means areas like right here in Brighton.
He called it democratic consent. There is one fairly obvious problem with this. The Greens' parliamentary seats are almost entirely in dense inner-city areas like Bristol, Brighton, Manchester, and their gains likely to be in London. Immigration removal centres are sited near airports and MOD airfields for operational reasons, but the policy's impracticality may be beside the point. What Youssef was trying to do was to tell voters, back us or be punished. Former Conservative Minister Simon Clarke called it an abuse of power. Labour called it grotesque. The question worth asking is, why does Reform keep sailing so close to the wind on the rules, and why does it so rarely seem to pay a price? Sam, the Harborne donation has all the ingredients of a genuine scandal. A crypto billionaire bankrolling 2/3 of your entire party's funding since its foundation, plus now this £5 million personal gift to the leader that wasn't declared. You've got an active investigation happening by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner. Will this cut through to voters? And if not, Why not? And would any other party get away with it?
So I think you're starting to see the accumulation of different things, different scandals around reform, starting to edge away at their support. They have dropped in the polls by about 6 points on average since last summer. If you look in detail at the sort of polling, you've got a group of hardcore Farage fans that are going to support him, whatever's in the papers, that's the evil media conspiracy, whatever. Then you've got a lot of people who are fed up with the conventional parties, thinking about reform, but a bit nervous about reform. Don't necessarily like Farage that much, worry that they'd be too extreme, but, who are definitely considering them. And those people, they're not going to pick up every story about every scandal. They're not, generally speaking, people who spend a lot of time reading political media, but every time there's one of these stories, this donation, Richard Tice's recent tax issues, the stuff around Farage at school, it just chips away at his approval ratings, his popularity, a sense that he's the type of person who's suitable to be prime minister. So I think it does have an effect. But I also think it's true the press don't really know quite what to do with a lot of this stuff.
I mean, if you think about Labour's first month in government in 2024, when the Wahid Ali wardrobe gate story broke, I mean, the media were obsessed with it and really ran with it all the way through and up to the Labour Party conference in the late September, early October. This is far more questionable, I would argue, than that. But yet, beyond the usual people writing the odd bit about it doesn't seem to have gripped their zeitgeist.
You have a general structural problem, which I know I've talked about before on this show, in that most of the written media is skews rightwards, and the BBC tends to take a lot of direction from the written media in what it decides is important and worth reporting and focusing on. And naturally, the Mail and Express are not spending so much time on this story as they would on Starmer-related issues. They sail close to the wind, but they don't necessarily always obviously break the rules. Like this declaration, Farage wasn't in Parliament, he wasn't an MEP when he got the money. I think it's probably true that he should have declared it under the existing rules when he became a candidate, when he became an MP. But it's not clear cut. And a lot of our rules are like that. Yeah. Where they were just kind of quite dependent on people behaving themselves.
Good chaps
again. And you're not supposed to, it's a bit like Ofcom, they're not used to having to actually deal with challenges to their authority. So they don't really know what to do when they get them. So there's a bit of that going on as well. No one's quite sure exactly to what extent he's broken the rules. No one can quite prove. And I suppose there's a bit of legal as well. Like Harborne's rich. I don't imagine he's overly keen on coverage. And there's been very little about him, which is quite interesting. There's this guy who's put 20 million quid into one party. And we know he's a crypto billionaire. We know he's in Thailand. We know very little about him.
I mean, I thought there was another fascinating element to it, which was how the media side itself played out, because The Guardian got the story, put it to Farage and his people, who came back with a delaying line. And then, while The Guardian was delaying, went to the Telegraph to spike The Guardian story, basically. Yeah. And they got their retaliation in via the Telegraph before The Guardian had actually had a chance to put its exclusive out there. And then, Naomi, you spotted another thing today that on the Standard website, there's a big Reform banner ad.
Yeah, Reform have bought the whole advertising space on every page of the Standard's website today.
There's money coming in there. That crypto money is being well spent, isn't it? So you've got the media in there being used to play off against other media. You've got some elements of the media making money out of what happens. That's how the whole thing works. And then we got to remember also, I think, in terms of why isn't it getting quite as much cut through, that after Harborne gave Farage, as it was then, Brexit Party 10 million back in 2019, Farage then decided he was going to stand down a lot of his candidates to stop them dragging votes away from Johnson, who went on to win. Then, when Johnson himself stepped down, Harborne gave Johnson £1 million to go through, towards the running of his own private office. So a key element here is that Farage might be the biggest piggy, but he's not the only piggy at this particular political trough. There's a lot of it going on.
The government has now imposed an emergency moratorium on crypto donations to political parties. They're citing the difficulty of tracing where the money actually comes from. Anyone working in business will know, the know your client rules, that banks have to prove that they've tested who you are, lawyers similarly. Reform was the first major party to accept them, and during 2025 alone returned nearly 200,000 in donations it couldn't verify. Is it that the party genuinely just couldn't keep up with the rules, or is it a party that is just trying to push the envelope and got caught? I guess what I'm trying to get to is, do we think there is a culture of probity within Reform UK? It's made a lot about professionalising, we're vetting properly now, etc. Or is that just smoke and mirrors for copying what was traditionally the Tory playbook of taking dark money from dark people, regardless of the ethics of that?
I mean, I think they're obviously willing to bend the rules as far as they'll go to try and bring in as much cash as they can via whatever means they can. And you can see it in the other things that they're doing. You talked about this sort of horrendous policy announcement around we're going to build detention centres in green councils. I mean, that is illegal, but obviously you can make the promise and say you change the law. So they're sort of, again, we have a political system that's very dependent on norms and behaviours and isn't particularly well policed. So you've got quite a lot of space as a political party who's willing to bend. It's like the Leave campaign, with their football lottery thing to collect data. A clever wheeze to get to collect a lot of data, which shouldn't really have been allowed, but they found ways to use the rules to their advantage. And I think Reform are in a similar spirit.
And it's often what populists do. I've written a Substack recently on the Best of Written Substack about our constitutional arrangement and this good chaps theory on which most of it is built, leaving us probably uniquely exposed to authoritarian takeover. We don't have the safeguards in place, really, to fend off people that deviate from those norms that we've all come to know as precedent about how things are done. Reform aren't the only party on the right that have had some issues in this regard. Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain has had to return donations from an anonymous meme coin project. And remember, Lowe left Reform after a pretty bitter fallout with Nigel Farage. And he now, of course, has Elon Musk's endorsement. And the party is polling at around 3%. Sam, do you think that there is any likelihood that Rupert Lowe's party and efforts could begin to absorb some of that Reform vote, some of that, undecided third you talked about in the middle that might be thinking, I'm not quite sure I like the direction that Farage is taking the party?
I mean, I think Restore's appeal is to a pretty small proportion of the population. They are considerably more extreme than Reform, who are pretty extreme by British political standards themselves. Lowe has made it a point of saying that basically anybody is allowed in the party. So you have people who are very openly anti-Semitic, racist, not even trying to hide it behind legitimate concerns.
The kind of people who wish Tommy Robinson did have a political party of his own.
Right. And you've got people like Conor Tomlinson, who has said, absolutely explicitly, you shouldn't allow anyone who isn't native English and Christian in Parliament, stuff like that. Really extreme.
Really awful.
And I don't think, there is a constituency for that in the British population, but don't think it's as big as, it's not the kind of 25%, 30% that Reform are currently polling.
I guess my real question was, we always talk about how fractured votes are across the more progressive end of the political spectrum. Is there any hope that you could see a fracturing that might actually have an impact on seat distribution? Or do you think that they'll bob around maybe quite thinly spread at a low single-digit number and it won't make the difference?
I don't think they're going to get to the level where from a tactical voting point of view, it would make any sense for them, except in Lowe's constituency in Great Yarmouth. I think the bigger risk actually around them is that they drag, and this is already happening, they drag Reform rightwards. Because even though they get polling 3% on X, they're a big deal, right? There's a lot of people on X pushing Reform to be more like Restore, which has led Farage to actually complain about how nasty a place X was becoming recently, which was a bit sort of hot dog man mean. But nevertheless, that is a real risk that some of the stuff that Reform have been coming out with lately, like this policy around we're going to build these deportation centres in green councils, it's a lot more extreme than they were a year or two ago. And I think that is partly coming from them panicking a bit about dropping in the polls, but it's also coming from this sense of, we need to stop this threat from our right. I don't think Restore is going to become a big party, but I do worry that they will drag Reform further right.
And then, of course, Reform will drag the Conservatives under Badenoch even farther right, and the Overton window shifts somewhere out into the risk, the bottom of the garden again.
And yet the Greens don't seem to be having that impact on Labour, despite their huge success in the polls. They don't seem to be dragging Labour and the Lib Dems leftwards. So it feels like there isn't enough counterbalance to keep the middle somewhere where you'd hope it would be.
You could find the Greens. I mean, Labour are starting to shift a little bit leftwards, I think, on their economic messaging, partly because of the threat of the Greens. And if you got a new leader, after these local elections later this year, I think a big part of a leadership contest is going to be about how do we fight the Greens, and I think you could see a shift leftwards from Labour, particularly on the economic side. So because so much of the British political discussion happens still on X, it does have an oversized impact on
I think
how these shifts work.
In my mind's eye, I had Shabana Mahmood because we were talking about detention centres and asylum seekers. And so, I guess it's on that particular area where I've not really felt the Greens have a
But I would be astonished if she survived a new Labour leader coming in that post, because what she's doing is so contentious.
Quiet Riot. Starting or growing your own business can be intimidating and lonely at times. Your to-do list may feel endless with new tasks, and lists can easily begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything as a built-in business partner can be a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Gymshark, Rare Beauty, and Heinz, to brands just getting started. Shopify has hundreds of ready-to-use templates that can help you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. And you can tackle all the important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. And if people haven't heard about your brand, you can get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you, with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns to reach customers wherever they're scrolling or strolling. Start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm.
Quiet Riot.
Kenny, the detention centres announcement. Let's start with the very basic geography of it all. Yes, the Greens hold 2 rural seats in Herefordshire and Norfolk, but look, they've got Gorton and Denton in Manchester, they've got Bristol, Central, Brighton Pavilion, and all of their target seats for the next general election are almost entirely going to be in London and other urban areas. Zia Youssef announcing this, is it an actual policy, do you think, or just a threat that he knew is undeliverable, but the threat itself was just the point?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to go meta on it, I'd say that the threat itself was actually the policy, as much as the policy was here. It's rage bait, isn't it? Everyone involved knows that detention centres are placed according to logistics. It's difficult stuff. You need security. You've got huge transport infrastructure requirements. You do it for these reasons. You don't do it because Brighton annoyed Nigel Farage online. So Youssef was communicating old-fashioned tribal punishment politics. That's what it comes down to. Support us and you're protected. Oppose us and nasty things will happen to you or happen nearby. It's Trump 101.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. And ultimately, it makes no difference to Youssef whether or not there's an actual policy that can be enacted underneath.
And also, it's just horrible to frame it as a punishment.
It's grim. It's a new low, from my perspective, in how the politics of just say whatever will get you in the spotlight.
And just using, yet again, the most vulnerable people
I think
as a political football.
I think they did it for 2 reasons. One is to get immigration back in the spotlight because it hasn't been actually the number one issue in the news for a little while. The other thing they're doing is trying to make it the Greens their main opponent.
Yeah.
they are trying to push this idea it's them versus the Greens, because if the main attack on them is extremism, that's an attack that can also be made on the Greens. And they want to have the easiest to attack opponents possible. So I think that was a big part of why they did it. It may backfire because, again, you've got core reform vote who like anything they do. But again, a lot of these kind of waverers, maybe reform, don't like the other parties. I don't think they're going to like the sense of punishing voters. Even if you're not morally offended by it, what if you get stuck in a constituency that happens to vote Green? I mean,
exactly.
I just don't think your average, not very involved political punter is going to think that sounds like a reasonable thing to do. I think it makes them seem extreme.
There's also the idea, of course, that, we've talked about Rupert Lowe's crew. There is this idea that Yusuf probably wasn't speaking to the swing voters of Guildford. He was speaking to a group of people who enjoy the performance of aggression itself. Really talking to those people who...
Like a tough guy.
Exactly that who are being pulled off to the right and are being who are attracted to that hard man rhetoric that we've seen from Trump and that we've seen from Rupert Lowe as well. And I think that's a huge part of the audience, trying to stem the bleeding from that wound before it gets any more serious.
Funnily enough, the website he announced when he did the video talking about the policy, I think it's like votegreengetilegals.com.
Yeah.
It now redirects to the Refugee Council. I think they hadn't bought the domain before. So I spotted that earlier, and it's on the Best of Written Blue Sky if you want to go and take a look. So this logic of vote for us or face consequences is a significant departure from that good chap theory of how we do things. It's not very cricket. And it's not how British politicians traditionally have spoken to the public. Simon Clarke compared it to an abuse of ministerial power. You've touched on it. It is the audience to energise or re-energise the base because they're worried about the 6-point drop. Is it to intimidate swing voters in the way it's decided to? Could it have a chilling effect on somebody thinking of voting Green? Because there are people deciding between Green or Reform who are just, to hell with the status quo, I'm going to go for something different.
I think it's mainly a base policy. It is mainly a get immigration back in focus to help reinforce that's our number one issue, plus this element of just trying to get the Greens, it doesn't hurt them if the Greens do really well. It's good for them if the Greens do really well in these elections because it turns them into their main opposition. So I think it was a bit kind of us versus them. Choose one of these two parties. Don't choose the guys in the middle.
And of course, they know that it's the Greens who eat into the Labour vote, which is
exactly. So they're very happy for people to see this and go, oh, you bastards, I'm going to vote Green as a result of this. That works for them too. So I think that was the kind of electoral politics of it. Yeah. But I also just do think it comes across as really nasty. So I don't know how well it will play to the extent it's noticed at all.
And finally, there's a wider question here, Naomi. The Electoral Commission has got fairly limited powers. The Standards Commissioner moves slowly, and the political media cycle, well, it moves on very, very quickly indeed. Do you think that the existing mechanisms for holding parties to account on donations and conduct are simply not fit for purpose when a party's willing to be this brazen? And who on earth, if anyone, is actually able to fix this? Well,
look, we could level a lot of what I'm about to say at most of the watchdogs, who seem to be very watch and not very dog. Not enough bark. It's quite a quiet dog sitting there watching everything happen. The Electoral Commission actually does have quite broad powers of investigation and seizure of evidence. It just tries very hard not to use them. You have to ask, is it worth the expense for an organisation with limited resources to regularly conduct big investigations for the sake of a tiny allowable fine, which is still only £20,000 maximum, that just doesn't match the amount of money being donated? Everyone gets fined and they just factor it in. You price it in as an absorbable expense, especially if, like Reform, you have an excess of cash in the bank and it's all exacerbated by the current confusing regime where some things get regulated by the Electoral Commission, some things are a matter for the police. This is going to be sorted out to an extent within the new representation of the people bill that's currently going through Parliament. But the fundamental issue is about where we'd all like the line to be drawn, I think, on what is positive versus negative interference by a state regulator in live political and electoral events. And all of this comes to light in the week of a highly contested election. would we really want the regulator wading into comment or very publicly raiding a politician's home to grab paperwork just before an election? I think as these sorts of incidents increase in frequency and as the Electoral Commission takes on powers that were held by the police previously, they're going to have to be grappling with that question. And on the kind of specifics of Farage accepting the 5 million, the Electoral Commission's current guidance is basically that you become a candidate and therefore a regulated donee, which is the kind of legal title. That happens when you publicly announce your candidacy or that you're going for selection as a candidate. So regardless of when we might think he made the decision to stand, unless someone has evidence that he said it publicly. Now, look, the public could be a WhatsApp group with more than 2 people in it. If someone's got that around the time of or just before this donation gets made, he's done for hook, line and sinker on that front. The final point to make on the Electoral Commission, I think, is that they are stuck with regulations that define publishing and campaigning in ways that were written before social media existed. Exactly. And they are quite narrow definitions of the types of people who do the act of campaigning. Brings us back to a dog that's been muzzled. It's a watchdog that is watching.
And it's got another problem because somebody's tied its legs together. Because however we decide to regulate politics in the 21st century, and we're well into the 21st century, and we're well into the era of social media now, politics now, and for a couple of years already, operates at the speed of TikTok. A regulation at its very best is still operating at the speed of a carrier pigeon. And I'm not sure that there's anything that we can actually do to address that without turning the regulator into some sort of chaotic, knee-jerk, half-assed, pretendy regulator. Mm-hmm. The issue, I think, a huge part of it is that, as you say, unless something looks like it's absolutely jaw-droppingly end the world serious, the regulator's going to have to shake its head and go, do you know what? It's moved on. By the time we've spent 2 years investigating this, the outrage will have gone. All the headlines will have been turned into meme dust, and it will be a pointless waste of our very scarce
And they'll be in
resources.
government and have done away with democracy.
Completely. We'll all be out of a
Brilliant.
job.
Okay, call to action, listeners. Don't despair. There are good people doing good work, and few more so than Byline Times, who are pumping out exposés on reform candidates almost by the hour. Mad props to them, especially Josiah Mortimer, who's working pretty tirelessly on all of this. So we'll drop a link in the show notes to some of his latest work. Go and give them your support. Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot. Okay, now we've shone the spotlight on how the rules-based order around political funding is crumbling. It's time to turn our attention to that other rules-based order that winds up our friends on the right. It's time for Wokie Dokie.
Wokie Dokie.
Kenny, what's wokery destroying in the pillars of our civilization this week?
All right, well, there have been some sunny days lately, and the pubs of Topsham, my hood, have got busy.
Down in Devon?
Down in Devon. And some are easier to get into than others. They're all buildings. So the other day, sunshine came out. I'd gone out for a stroll because I'm healthy that way, and I felt sort of the magnetic draw of a pub door.
Very healthy.
It's just, look, magnets are good for you, especially magnets inside pubs. And it's probably the trickiest pub in Topsham to get served in because the bar is a bit of an odd shape. So, fortunately, there are only 4 girls in the queue in front of me. Happy days. Unfortunately, they decided they were going to order their half pint of Diet Coke for each one individually. So while I'm standing there, minding my own business.
Trying to be patient.
Being patient, there's a queue building up behind me. I think it's fine. In the queue, wait my time, get my beer, all is good. Fellow taps me on the shoulder and goes, excuse me, mate, are you going to shuffle along the bar in the traditional fashion, make room for everybody else? I shuffle along. I do what you do. I don't want to get a fight, I just want a beer. As I shuffle along the bar, I hear 2 young lads behind me in a queue. And one of them says, queuing? In a pub? What's all this woke nonsense then? So I'm starting to go, what? And then his buddy says, yeah, ban this wokeness gone mad in Britain's pubs. And I was like drinking next to the Daily Mail comments section.
Sorry, nothing is more British than queuing.
Well, this is a
How
point.
can Britishness itself be woke when the very people that bang on about woke are those that want to, reclaim Britain?
Well, except in pubs, right? Because the traditional work method is everyone just scrambles around, and which is a disaster for someone like me. Who's
And me.
Yeah.
Well, you've
I'm
nailed
waving
it.
my hand to try and get served. I'm very happy with queuing.
I love queuing for that reason. But two things occurred to me. You've both touched on it as I was there, because I thought, will I get ragey? No, I'll park that one. That could be a walkie-talkie. That's very useful.
Content.
But, so firstly, apparently, queuing for a pint on a sunny day is now woke in Great Britain. All right, point one. But point two, much more disturbingly, I think the lads actually did have a point. Because queuing at a pub bar, as you and I both know, Sam, has always been woke. It's an entirely artificial attempt to impose fairness and civility and social order on what should be, fundamentally a lawless Darwinian scramble. Involving elbows and eye contact and low-level dishonesty at the pubs that I drink in. So this week, queuing for beer is woke, and I am deeply, deeply sorry for my transgression. I promise it won't happen again. Elbows out the next time and screw you all.
Thank you, Kenny. I think we should have called that section Wokey Cokey.
Hey!
Listeners, send them in. We do love to hear your suggestions. The email address is quietrightpod@gmail.com.
Quiet Riot. Turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Who are the voters sitting between Labour's left bloc and Reform's right bloc? Now, Sam's recent piece in Substack tries to put some hard data around a group that political strategists endlessly obsess over, but he argues fundamentally misunderstand. These are not the median voters most people assume them to be. They are younger, they're better educated, they're higher earning, they're more urban and more ethnically diverse than average. They are also in some ways more optimistic. They're less hostile to business and politicians. They're more likely to believe that people in Britain have a genuine shot at getting on in life. The trouble with treating this group as simply occupying the space between two ideological poles is that it implies they're defined by where they sit relative to others, rather than by any coherent set of values of their own. As the left and right ends of the spectrum have each lurched farther out in recent years, the definition of who counts as sitting in the middle shifts with them. Now, what Sam's research suggests is that this group may actually be the most politically underserved in Britain today, not because they're being ignored, but because the parties chasing them are using entirely the wrong map. Sam, the voters that you identify in this centre block don't look like the average voter at all. If they're younger, if they're richer, if they're more educated, more optimistic than the norm, does calling them centre actually tell us anything useful about what they believe, or is it purely just a description of what they're not?
There's lots of different ways you can define centre. You can define it ideologically, that's sort of halfway between sort of extremes. You can define it in terms of the median voter, which I think a lot of people tend to do, which is the person who holds the average set of opinions. What I wanted to look at is a group who are slightly different from that, which is the floating voters, people who might vote for a party of right or left. And that's about a third of voters would vote, could vote either way. I think the central insight of I did this through a big poll of 3,000 people with an organisation called Hold Sway. And the big insight from the poll is that the median voter is not the same as the swing voter. And it's worth pausing on that, because that has not ever really been true before, I don't think. It's a really counterintuitive point. You'd think the person who had the average set of views would be in the middle. That is the logical, would be the floating voter.
We've all done maths, and that's what your teacher would tell you.
But in actual fact, there's people in the left block and right block are more similar to each other on certain types of questions than they are to floating voters.
Right. Give us an example.
So, for instance, in their attitudes towards business, both people who will only vote for a left-wing party and people who only vote for a right-wing party are more hostile to businesses like supermarkets, like car insurance firms,
energy companies,
water companies, than these floating voters in the middle. Then people on left and right are more likely to be hostile towards politicians, to think they are doing bad things to the country, to be more critical and concerned about their fellow citizens. They're generally less economically secure, more distrustful, more angry about the state of things. They're roll the dice people, essentially. I'm simplifying a bit because obviously these groups contain a lot of different types, but there's a lot of roll the dice people in there who are just very, very frustrated and angry about the status quo, feel they've been let down, feel that they aren't being given a chance in life. And then you've got this group who are a bit better off, a bit better educated, younger, not necessarily hugely politically engaged, even though they're more likely to have a degree, but just, probably working for private sector, who don't feel quite as angry, don't think the country's going in the right direction, but don't feel quite as frustrated and angry as that group, and are a bit more trusting of businesses and politicians. And if we asked a question about AI and your, sort of positivity towards AI, they were more positive about AI than either group on either side, who are both more worried about the sort of economic effects. So you've got this kind of slightly different group.
We found this in best written work that we did called Decoding Populism, and that sort of angry group you talked about, we found make up a good fifth, if not a quarter of the reform vote. This kind of disgruntled disruptor, economically precarious, burn the whole thing down. And then we found other groups that we called the melancholy middle, and I think collectivists, left behind collectivists, who were much more sympathetic to social issues. They do like the NHS being free at the point of use. They do worry a little bit about the environment and things like that. They're not sort of totally on the Farage, climate is woke agenda thing, and are a little bit more pro-European. So while I think there are overlaps with the groups you're talking about, those people have, in our research, committed to reform.
So I would imagine your disgruntled disruptors are pretty much definitely going to vote reform.
There's no shifting
And in
them.
my poll, they would have been definite right bloc voters. Yeah. And then you'll have people who are equally angry and frustrated, but have slightly different kind of life circumstances, probably private renters rather than owning their own home, younger, etc., who are pretty much definitely going to vote Green.
And Sam, do you know where your centre voters are clustered, or are they pretty evenly distributed across GB?
Urban.
Right.
They're much more likely to be urban. So I think you have a lot of this type of voter in London. Remember, London used to be a Tory city. It wasn't that long ago London was a Tory city, which now seems crazy. But there are a lot of people in London who are young graduates who are quite well off, right? At the last election, they mostly voted Labour or Liberal Democrat. But historically, they'd have voted Tory.
Yeah.
They're not naturally left-wing people. But the Tories have kind of abandoned that group. So one of the points I was trying to make in the post is there's an opportunity for Labour here to hold on to that group, because Labour won the most of these types of voters at the last election. If they moderate their appeal, if they get their strategy right to build a coalition between left bloc voters and this kind of centre group by focusing on issues like EU where there is alignment.
Don't start me.
But there's also an opportunity here for the Conservatives. Actually, in this group of floating voters in the centre, Kemi Badenoch was the most popular of the leaders at the moment. I think they're probably quite naturally Conservative voters, but the Conservatives just aren't there for them at the moment. At the moment, the Conservatives are a pensioner party who are screaming about deportation centres, which is not attractive to this group. So if the Tories just realigned and focused on economics rather than culture wars, and I think they might try and do that. They could probably replace Mel Stride as Shadow Chancellor after these locals. There is an opportunity for them too. So both main parties really could do more to appeal to this group, to boost their polling, given that Greens and Reform are pretty heavily concentrated on focusing on the left and right blocs.
Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot. Is politics getting too complicated for the likes of us? I mean, we hear about these different groups and how they interact.
In my day, it was just Labour or the Conservatives.
You were used to. They were for the working man and woman, and they were for business, and they were for playing around in water parks. But the complications that you've shone a spotlight on, they waved the flag for fragmentation among voters. It's probably not a coincidence that we're seeing fragmentation among political parties as well. It's a long-winded way of saying, are we on an inevitable slope towards electoral reform? Because the system certainly is not good enough for the electoral base that we have at the moment, but for the voters coming through, it's going to be completely unfit for purpose, isn't it?
Yeah, and you'll see at the local elections this week, there'll be, seats won on 20% of the vote because of the system that we have. I think if we don't move towards electoral reform, and I don't think we're going to in the next few years, voters start to figure it out. And so they start to sort of figure it out and build two-party systems at a local level. Somewhere like Hastings is going to become a reform Green council versus Green council this week. And then that's kind of how people will think about their two-party options, which is very dangerous for Labour and the Conservatives, because people won't try and keep five parties in their heads. They'll think it's them versus them. It's I like this side, they're the ones on the other side. But it will take time for it to sort of all fall into place. So in the meantime, you'll get some very messy results. We're
seeing it in Scotland, actually, where you've got two ballot papers. The first past the post version remains people's primary choice. But on the second ballot paper, where you've got party lists, the Greens are performing far better up there on that second ballot paper. There's kind of like a 6 or a 7% difference.
Well, I mean, Scotland's electoral system is insane. Let's be clear. It's a ridiculous electoral system because of the way things are falling at the moment. The SNP will win pretty much every constituency, the vast majority of the constituencies. So there's no point voting for them in the regional list because they can't win any regional list seats because it's about making it more proportional. So if you've won all the constituency seats, you can't win the regional list seats. So if you've voted SNP, if you're an SNP supporter, vote for them in the constituency vote. There's no point voting for them in the regional list. So actually, then you can say, well, I want to hurt Labour, I'll vote Green, which is a really stupid electoral system.
It's odd, isn't it? I mean, it produces a very different outcome, and it produces an outcome that by some measures is fairer, in inverted commas, but that will depend on one's perception of what actually is fair.
And the Welsh elections this time, which I know you've talked about, are pure PR this time. Well, PR within constituencies. So it'll be the first sort of proper PR election in Great Britain. And that will be really interesting to see how the voters react to that kind of system, what it throws up, and how it starts to affect how people vote.
The Lib Dems might seem like a really natural home for the voters you've described. Economically comfortable-ish, pro-Europe, sceptical of populism, don't hate immigrants. But you show their voters actually skewed towards the left bloc, which is surprising because I would say that their kind of national messaging isn't targeting the left. Why have they failed to connect with this group in particular, do you think?
So there's a couple of things we're saying. I think, firstly, the Lib Dems have become very dependent on effectively Labour voters in seats that Labour can't win. So what they've really done well over the last few years is consolidate all the Labour voters in the South East into the Lib Dem party. But that means they've become a more left-wing party. They've absorbed a lot of Labour voters, which makes it harder for them to appeal to a more centre-right kind of voter. The other thing is, I think you've got a lot of people within the Lib Dems who probably do think of themselves as quite centrist, but wouldn't dream of voting Reform or Tory because of Europe. And therefore, they're appearing in the left bloc in my survey, but would actually probably have quite a lot in common with the centre bloc. It's just that they're absolutely not willing to vote Tory Reform because of Europe, which radicalised a lot of people who are in the Lib Dems.
Which is funny then, because you've got the Lib Dems at the moment not saying rejoin, even though they are the most pro-European party. In fact, they've been more mealy-mouthed about it than quite a few Labour figures have been. Of course, Neil Kinnock's been out and proud, but we've had other Labour MPs like Marsha Cordova making the case. And you've got obviously Greens saying it quite loudly, SNP and others. So I think they might be finding it quite difficult to navigate prioritisation, whether they need to really hold on to and double down on that old Labour vote that they've inherited in what are now Liberal Reform marginals, and then, but to increase beyond the 72 we probably are going to have to start to appeal to slightly more conservative voters, particularly in the southwest, where there weren't huge numbers of people outside of urban areas that were pro-EU. So do you sort of think it's the case of that classic, if you stand in the middle of the road, you get hit by traffic coming from both sides?
I think the Lib Dem strategy has been essentially to run local campaigns and not to have too much of a national strategy, so that they can appeal to different types of electorates in the types of seats that types of places that they're trying to win. You give the example of the Southwest, which is much less pro-EU than a lot of their like South London or home counties areas. And I think Ed Davey is a particular kind of, that's how he's fought elections in the past. That's how he's always thought about elections. How do you tactically maximize the number of seats, the number of councils that you win, rather than how do you have a national strategy? If they move on from him at some point as leader, which I don't think they're going to do anytime soon, but they will at some point, will you have a leader making a kind of almost a Zach Palancy style pitch to say, I want to be much more national facing, I want to have much more of a profile, I want to take the Lib Dems places that they're not currently going? Or will you have someone who's like, actually, let's keep with this steady as we go, very local, let's
under
just
the radar,
incrementally increase our numbers of seats?
There's quite a space for a new leader to move into, isn't there, though? Because, Lib Dems in the last couple of years have projected so much policy caution on a national scale. It's practically witness protection.
But I don't think anyone, people don't tend to vote Lib Dem because of what they stand for. They vote for them because they're the not reform and Tory option in the seats that in the South, which is work for them electorally. But there is a limit to how far you can push that strategy.
And of course, they used to perform much better in Scotland.
They did.
And even in Wales, they're never quite as well as they managed in Scotland.
That's right, and it wasn't a protest vote. It was an actual vote. The Highlands in particular area of Scotland, there was a very strong Liberal Democrat support base. And some very, very solid politicians as well.
Charles Kennedy.
Charles Kennedy, our joint favourite politician, of
Campbell.
course. Yeah. And exactly that. So historically, it's not the case that Lib Dems have always existed in a sort of policy vacuum. They've kind of slipped into this, the comfortable slippers of policy in many ways over the last few years. And the rest of the world of politics is starting to go past them, isn't it? Sam, you raised the possibility that the new bloc that we're talking about might actually, reward honesty and coherent policy over the sort of kind of defensive populism that the main parties at the moment are currently defaulting to. Is that optimistic? Voters saying they want politicians to tell hard truths and then actually rewarding them rather than saying their vote dropped 6% instantaneously. They're two very different things.
It may be me being overly optimistic, which is not something I usually am, but there's an awful lot of defensive crouching in the face of voters at the moment from all parties. There's,
I agree with you
and I think if you look at what's happening around Iran at the moment, you've got everyone in different ways, or blaming the petrol companies, or we should, we should cut fuel tax, or we should give people energy subsidies. No one's out there saying, our economy is going to be smaller. This is going to hurt. We need to find ways of restricting demand for energy. Like, no one wants to have any difficult conversations because they don't believe that the voters will give them any credit for it. But it's a dead end as a politically, because you can do that for a bit, but ultimately it doesn't work because you're not being honest about any of the problems. And, like Labour, they won on 2024, I would argue, on a false prospectus, saying we're not going to need more taxes. We can improve public services without that, and they've come unstuck as a result. So I kind of think someone needs to try actually just being honest and putting together a coherent, set of proposals to the voters and seeing if that might work. It might be that voters got at least this group of voters have got so fed up with people lying to them that they would actually reward that. And if you think about some of the most successful politicians in history, not just here but in other countries, it has been those who've been willing to give a bit of a tougher message and to offer some unpopular ideas. But then as they've become, successful, they get credit for them.
That would mark a huge change in political culture right now, wouldn't it? Because, parties particularly had the first past the post, but they've become terrified of losing their loudest voices in the social media age in particular, because small swings and concentrated blocks can wipe out an awful lot of seats very, very quickly. What you're asking there is for them to start ignoring those loud voices, to not pay attention to the squeaking wheels and to pay attention to everybody else.
Yeah,
big ask.
And it is actually one of the advantages of having a PR system is you're not as at risk in every election from being completely wiped out. So you have a bit more freedom and flexibility to try to take more risks. Although a lot of European countries that have PR would complain about the same thing I'm complaining about. I think you do get a bit more permission for parties to to try different things. Whereas I think one of the reasons there's this defensive crouch politics from everyone at the moment is in a 5-party system, everyone is just so vulnerable and there aren't any safe seats. It is starting to really affect politicians' willingness to say anything that might trouble voters, but then they're all really unpopular, so it doesn't work.
Well, we know some politicians do listen to this show, and if you're one of them thinking about a change of tack towards something much more honest and open and evidence-based and thought through, then take the call to action this week, which is to sign up, of course, to Sam's brilliant Substack. Comment is free. We are going to leave a link in the show notes for you because it is daily with its advice about what could and should be happening to make our country a better place.
Quiet Riot. Now, whether your politics lean left, right, or straight down the middle, there's one thing we know you all share. And that's the love of some genuinely good news in these somewhat challenging times. So let's put a smile on your collective faces with another Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. I want good news.
Let's put a smile on your face this week, Naomi.
Okay, well, look. The news obviously always feels totally London-centric to almost everybody, particularly those not in London. But on Grin and Share It, we rarely spotlight the UK's capital. And today that changes. It is a Primrose Hill balm for your soul.
Ooh.
So a restaurant formerly known as Home Kitchen is reopening at the weekend as 130 Primrose. And it's being directly run as a charity to get homeless people back into work. And while the name takes its cue from the address, 130 Primrose Hill, it is drawing on that Latin phrase of prima rosa, a symbol of spring and new beginnings. So Monica Galetti is the chef and broadcaster and master chef judge. She's going to be the executive chef and a trustee. And the mission is really simple: recruit, train and employ people with lived experience of homelessness, offering paid work, accredited training and a route into long-term hospitality careers. They've got 50 covers. They're going to be open 7 days a week, doing breakfast, lunch and dinner. I think it's going to be quite a relaxed brasserie style setting, a bit of street side dining on warmer days. It's got an a la carte menu with Mediterranean influences. I think there'll be like salads and sandwiches at lunchtime, evenings a little bit more jazzy, and a speakeasy cocktail bar I think might open in the basement in a couple of months' time.
With queuing.
The first cohort included prison leavers, refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, people in addiction recovery and others affected by homelessness. And every employee at 130 Primrose is going to be offered a 6-month contract as part of either front of house or kitchen, and the opportunity to complete qualifications in food hygiene, allergen awareness, And when they complete their time, they're going to be supported into further opportunities within the hospitality sector, which is struggling because of Brexit to recruit and retain talent. So this is not just a lovely Grin and Share It, but also a call to action to book a table next time you're in London. And we'll leave a link in the show notes.
That is utterly brilliant, Naomi. That's a good one. Particularly as the UK hospitality sector, the last time I checked, is still short of something like 130,000 people. Winner, winner, get me dinner. Listeners, if you want to know more, we will, as Naomi said, drop a link in the show notes so you too can not just grin, but also share it.
And that is the end of today's show. A huge thank you to Sam for joining us once again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Do make sure you are signed up to Sam's Substack. Comment is free. The link is in the show notes.
And don't forget, you can show your support for our show at ko-fi.com/QuietRiotPod. If there are any crypto billionaires listening, just think how subversive a £5 million gift to us would be. No strings attached, of course.
Alex will hopefully be back on Friday evening with a Midnight Mass special on the election results, and his excellent Podyssey will resume on Saturday with a look at the always appropriate story of Sisyphus. And Alex and I will be back again on Sunday, where no doubt Alex will be right as rain and I will be nursing a post-election hangover.
Hugs, fist bumps and chamomile compresses to you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simone Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot. I haven't the foggiest idea what they were talking about.